Hey friends, you're listening to the Hope and Hard Pills podcast, where we are exploring practical insight for racial justice and social change. I'm your host, Andre Henry. Joining me from North Carolina is my co-host, Alicia T. Crosby. How you doing, Alicia?
I'm doing pretty good this morning, and I know that ordinarily I talk about my excitement for the show, but today I'm going to talk about your excitement for the show. So, y'all, this week's guest is Srdja Popovic, and I know all about Srdja because of my relationship with Andre. So, Srdja is an activist organizer who is just brilliant and has written books, which we will recommend later on in this podcast. But Andre was super excited when he got to interview him. Like, I definitely remember when this conversation took place because of how pumped you were.
So the reason why I was so excited to talk with Srdja is because Srdja is a prominent figure when you're reading about nonviolent struggle. When you're reading about nonviolent struggle, you're going to come across a few names. You're going to come across Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You're going to come across Mohandas Gandhi. You're going to come across Gene Sharp if you're going down the rabbit hole deep enough. And if you're down there, you're going to come across Srdja Popovic, because Srdja co-founded an activist group that took down a dictator in Serbia in the year 2000 or late 90s. Now, when I read Srdja's book, Blueprint for Revolution, I was on the quest that I'm still on to understand how societies change through nonviolent struggle. And what I loved about Blueprint was that it's funny, it's hopeful, and it is a good summary of so much of the work in the field of nonviolence. And it is so readable. Like, so much of the stuff that I've read is kind of hard to read, but this was actually a pleasure to read. And Srdja's email was in the back of the book. And I remember thinking as I was reading it,
accessibility.
I wish I could talk to this person. And he put his email in the back of the book and said, reach out anytime. And so I did. And I ended up taking a class from Harvard on leading nonviolent struggle that Srdja was one of the professors for. And so it's been really cool to kind of get to know him over the past couple of years, and for him to decide to be on our show.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the thing that I'm encouraged by, in addition to Andre's excitement, is understanding that there are other people all around the world who were ordinary people and decided to stand up for the sake of social change. And it really did make a difference. And so with that, we're going to introduce you to Srdja Popovic. Have fun listening to the interview, y'all.
No, it doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be this way. Doesn't have to be. No, it doesn't have to be this way.
Hi, Srdja. How you doing?
Oh, great. Springy weather in Serbia. Hi, Andre. Great to reconnect with my favorite Harvard student.
I am so honored and excited to talk with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure all mine.
Srdja, I am always bragging about your book, Blueprint for Revolution, and telling everyone that they should read it because of this incredible story of a bunch of college students, if I'm correct, that banded together to take on the dictatorship of Slobodan Milosevic. And I wondered if you could just really, really briefly, like, kind of set the scene of the setting of where that happened. What was Serbia like when you and your friends decided that something had to be done?
Okay, we are talking about 90s in Serbia, when I was in my early academic years. And of course, I never thought I would be an activist. I thought the activism is the business for old ladies standing for dog rights, and wasn't really something cool. I was more into dating girls and playing in a rock band. But then the situation changed, and then we got a really bad and kind of crazy national leader called Slobodan Milosevic. And in the range of several years, from 1991, when he climbed to power, to maybe 1993, he already started two national wars, followed by ethnic cleansing, hundreds of people leaving country, including my own brother, hyperinflation, eaten the middle class. So you see your world is falling apart around you. And as a young person, of course, you have two choices. One is to flee. and go to the place where we have perspective. Another one is to fight. And I bet my generation was among the stubborn ones. So yes, there was a breaking point in it. The breaking point was watching the Serbian super band connected of the five most famous rock bands at the time, singing from the truck their anthem they created as a kind of national cry out against the lunacy and nationalism and war. And it was in early 90s, and walking behind this truck, specifically recognizing all of the people around me who were more into playing in bands and less into activism.
Wow.
I understood that activism can be something for everybody. We soon jumped into the students' protest. The first one was 1992, the second one 1996, 1997. In 1998, we formed a movement called Otpor, which is the Serbian movement for resistance, which grew from 11 people into 70,000 people in 2000,
Wow.
and was pivotal in bringing down Milosevic at the time.
Wow. In the documentary, I can't remember what the name of it is. It's taking down the dictator. Is that
Bringing down the dictator? Yes,
bringing down the dictator.
Bringing down the dictator. Mm-hmm.
I see these scenes of some of you guys like in a room, and there's a whiteboard and some education going on. And I know that Gene Sharp's work came into the picture somehow. What was the role of that kind of education in the movement?
Well, first of all, the principle that you can find across the world is that educating your movement is far the best investment you can make into it. First of all, when you take a look at people power movements, they rely on people. Mm-hmm. The more people are engaged, the more people invest into movements, and of course, the more skills and knowledge people have, the more successful movement is. So Otpor very early understood this process. We had a lot of experienced activists, and then we start sending them to the grassroots level to train activists on how to effectively take charge, how to effectively brand things, how to effectively make short spanks, how to avoid confrontation with police, how to talk with different political and social groups. So there was a very strong training component. And there is a direct correlation between how much you invest into your movement and the effectiveness of the movement. So training your activists early in a process from day one, when somebody joins the movement, you bring this person to the meeting, you spend 1 hour talking to this person about what this movement is all about, what is the strategy, what is the tactics, and you have far better chances that people will come back, because people love when you talk openly to them. People love when they feel you're investing something into them. And if you're ready to invest something in your movement member, they're very likely to invest their time and energy into the movement. So educating your activists, working on skills and knowledge, thinking, listening to their needs and their ideas, and turning their ideas into reality makes a good quality movement. It is the affiliation with the movement that grows with this education, but it's also the affiliation of the movement which grows with the tactics you offer. One direct correlation is between what you're offering to the people and the level of risk. The less risky, the more humorous, the more cool the activities you offer to the people, and they are more likely to participate.
Yeah.
Not too many people will spend all day on the march. Not too many people will risk confrontation with police. Not too many people, and my organization works with people from autocratic countries where you can lose job, you can lose freedom, or worse, if you demonstrate against the government. So not too many people will take this risk. So the quality and the speed of the evolution and growth of your movement is in direct correlation in what you can offer to them. So you're looking at the low-risk tactics, you're looking at wearing badges, you're looking at graffiti, you're looking at stickers, you're looking at hitting at pots and pans. You're basically looking at a thing where people can participate, can feel that they're doing something meaningful, but still can get away with it without a large risk or large investment.
Right. Okay, so I want to ask you one more question about Otpor, and then I want to ask you some more broad questions about struggle and how ordinary people can be involved. Was there an armed struggle going on at the same time, or were there people who were using more violent tactics, whether it was organized or a little disorganized, at the same time as the nonviolent movement?
In Serbia, there was no violent struggle in parallel. There were many movements like the African struggle for against the apartheid in South African Republic, which had this guerrilla component. And first of all, when you take a look at the success in the nonviolent struggle, you're always outlining 3 principles. However, struggles are different. If you stick to the unity and if you build the unity of people and unity of purpose and unity within the organization, if you develop the strategic and tactical planning And if you hold on to nonviolent discipline, you are more likely to win. And I will emphasize this nonviolent discipline very strong. There are several reasons why nonviolent discipline is paramount. First, it increases the participation. If you are holding the protestable type of demonstrations where people can come with kids and dogs, more people are likely to come.
Right.
If, however, your demonstrations are looking like the actual demonstrations of yellow vests in Paris, where people are burning cars and throwing Molotovs and fighting with police, your participation will go down.
Right.
So the higher the risk of violence, the lower the participation. It's a common sense thing.
Right.
Second, it's your appeal to the society. If you really are looking into the nationwide democratic change or human rights change or racial equality change in the society, you need people from the middle of the political and social spectrum. In order to get to the people in the middle of the political spectrum, you need mainstream tactics. Extreme tactics doesn't work.
Right.
Extreme tactics are only fueling the people on the extremes from the both poles. And when you're looking at the racial struggle in US, for example, when you're looking at the alt-right and the Antifa response to the alt-right, they're actually mutually feeding each other. While the people in the middle are too scared or too shocked to get into this struggle. So when you're looking at the nonviolent discipline, it's not only a word, it's something you exercise in the movement. In Serbia, we were looking at several layers of it. We were preaching nonviolence. The day one, you would be joining the movement. We'll tell you that our goal is to change the government through the nationwide participation in elections, that we abstain from violence. You're doing it through addressing the security forces, by trying to convey them to your side, by feeding them and giving them flowers instead of throwing stones to them. You're also looking at what are potentially violent groups that can share your vision but don't share your methodology, that can come and interrupt your demonstrations, and you avoid to be affiliated with this violent group. So whether this is a preaching level, strategic level, or tactical level, you try to avoid violence and armed struggle at any costs. In fact, there is a huge academic study led by a guy named Kurt Schock, who is also a good friend of ours. He teaches at Rutgers, which scientifically proves that it was actually the military flanks or the guerrilla flanks that were harming the participation in nonviolent movements throughout the history.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I want to ask you about some of the principles and how they can be applied in America and other parts of the world who might be listening to this interview. What stands out to me is that Otpor built a national movement. And in America, when we're talking about racism, a lot of times it's hard to think beyond the local level or to move beyond the local level. How does a movement build capacity to confront a national problem?
That's a great question, especially in a large country like America. First of all, you're looking at the history. So how the civil rights movement grew from the movement fighting from separation and desegregation of the toilets and public transport in Southern American state into something which had a broad appeal. And of course, that means that movements need a nationwide vision. And that vision should be shared not only by the social groups affected, but also by the wider population. And whether you're looking at inspirational words of Martin Luther King and his "I Have a Dream" speech, or you're looking in a more defining documents of the civil rights movement, you need this vision very well formulated and appealing to various parts of society. Second, you need strategy. You need to look at the battleground, and you need to look at the potential allies. So it's not only the group which is affiliated that is poisoning the struggle. You need to take a look at the right institutions that you need to sway, where these institutions are on local or a national level, and you need to find a way to target this institution. Last, and probably the most important thing is when you want to grow from local to global, you need some kind of movement's identity. Take a look at the environmental movement. Environmental movement started as a bunch of hippies tying themselves for the fences of the nuclear power plant in the 60s. Now it's a worldwide movement where like last week, around 1.5 million of high school students walked from their schools across the world in order to raise awareness over the climate change. How come? Because they had vision, because they have identity, and because they have the appeal behind their only local problem. So it's not just the war problem in one Indian village, which is tackled by the climate change. So we have drought. It's a global problem. We need to find a global language to talk global problem. But more important, we need to find identity. It is the identity which distinguishes movement between just the stray of protest. I give you the very simple example. If you take a high school kid and show him or her a slide showing two photos. One photo coming from anti-Iraq war protests, another photo coming from Woodstock, the iconic concert from the World Peace Movement. And you ask a kid, what do you see? Immediately, the kid distinguishes between the protest and the movement.
Oh, wow.
Because because you take a look at the hippies, and whether you like the music or not, they share the same music. Whether you like the way they're dressed or not, they share the way they're dressed. Whether you like their hair or not, they share the way they're wearing their hair. But more important, they share their view on the world, they share their view on war, they share their view on race, they share a view on free love. They share the things far behind that just one event which brings them together. If you take a look at anti-Iraq war protests, you will just see a bunch of groups with their own identities coming to use this opportunity to recruit more for their own groups. But this is not the movement identity. So if you really want to talk about the racial problem in US, you need to go far behind just Baltimore type of ghettos where people are exposed to the real life problems, and find a way to build the movement which talks to people countrywide, which try to takes a look at the language, take a look at the division of the society, and take a look at the real causes, in my opinion, of this problem. And this is the social distance. Mm-hmm. I think it is the social distance between the members of deprived groups in US and the members of privileged group in the US. And that social distance builds the situation in which the security forces are going into this deprived neighborhoods, and they are perceived as being the occupying force. And from their own point of view, when they go there with a feeling that they are going to patrol in Fallujah, Iraq. So this is the social distance, which is the real enemy within this problem. And we need to find a way to find the dialogue, but we also need to find the institutions that will bridge this social distance.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I just have a couple more questions for you. And as you talk about this strategy, there are a lot of ordinary people that want to be a part of a movement, but when they hear these kinds of things, it intimidates them because they don't want to be the organizers, but they want to be a part. So what would you say to those people who say, I want to be a part of the change, but I don't want to be an organizer?
I'll tell that person to watch The Lord of the Rings and take a look at how one of that's a very popular blockbuster. I'd rather have them read the book, but the book is quite long. Well, basically what happens in that, my favorite kids book, is that you have a bunch of people that are absolutely unfit to lead, absolutely uninterested in world's politics, but for some reasons they're in an eye of the storm when it comes to the change. And each single one of us can represent the Hobbit, a very laid-back creature interested in good food and good drinking that doesn't want to be the organizer and the leader of the change, but somehow there was nobody else to take that ring to Mordor. It happened in Serbia. We figured out that the opposition will not end Milosevic, the international community will not end Milosevic, and that we're going to live in this horror until we take things into our hands. So anybody can be a leader, anybody can be a social mobilizer. And in fact, it's a very rewarding thing because it gets you in touch with really interesting people and it gives a new meaning to your life. So for people standing on the fence, I will first of all let them go and take a 3-minute TED talk by a guy named Derek Sievers, How to Start a Movement. Yes. And you'll find the shirtless guys dancing, and then the first follower and the second follower. And yes, if you don't want to be the leader, find a person who does something extraordinary and be the follower. Because it is the first follower that transforms the no nut into leader, and it's also the first follower who shows others how to follow. So don't be ashamed if you don't want to be a leader, but if you are finding somebody who is doing something really important for the social change, whether it is keeping your local officials accountable, building the racially more equal society, building the economically more equal society, go there and try to follow, and then try to learn the system of the organization and read books and bring some knowledge from the nonviolent movement into it, and you are already doing a great service to your community and mankind.
Wow. Well, Srdja, I am so appreciative of your time today, and I feel like we got through so much in 21 minutes. And one thing I just wanted to comment on is that I just feel the passion in what you say. There's so much energy around what you share. And I wanted to ask you, what keeps you hopeful about being able to continue to change the world?
Well, first of all, I'm in relatively regular contact with people doing this thing in very hopeless societies, and these brave people are what is giving me the hope. Brave activists coming from different countries from across the world, and then I'm seeing their successes and their failures, but overall I see their courage and their commitment. Second, and being an activist myself and working with activists for 15 years, I believe in different kinds of change, and I've seen impossible things happening if people come together around the dream and decide to work vigorously in order to perform the change. Last but not of least importance, I'm the father of 2 young kids. Moma has 4.5 years. Delea is a little bit older than 2. And for their own sake, I need to believe that if we try really hard, we can leave them a little better world.
Yeah. How can people follow your work and keep in touch with you?
I'm very open to responding to the people. The way to take a look and many different and very handy free resources would be to go on a web page of my organization, Canvas, which is www.canvasopedia.org. Probably the coolest part of it is how to build a movement in under 45 minutes. This is a series of short, very cool animated videos which are covering the concepts like planning or nonviolent discipline or use of humor. And this is the best visited page that we have. Another way is, of course, to buy a book, Blueprint for Revolution. My personal email is on the back on the book, and get in touch with me. We can't, of course, respond to all of the people, but whoever is doing something interesting, we try to figure out how to help him or her in order to learn more about the nonviolent social change. This is the mission of Canvases. This is the mission to which I committed the last 15 years of my life.
Wow. Well, thank you so much again, Srdja. I'm so thrilled to share this with people. And if you are listening, you really should get Blueprint for Revolution and visit canvasopedia.com. I spend a lot of time on that Build a Movement in 45 minutes page because the videos are so easy to digest and to share with people. It breaks it down in such an easy way. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity, and keep up the changing the world.
No, it doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be this way. Doesn't have to be. No, it doesn't have to be this way.
There are many things that I appreciate about the conversation that y'all had. In fact, I took notes. But I mean, it's so good to be reminded of the fact that there are people out there who never thought that they'd be dedicated to this work, never thought that they'd be activists, never thought that they'd be organizers, who sits there and thinks as a child, when I grow up, I want to topple a dictator. Very that's not a thought.
They don't
have.
teach you that that's a career path in elementary school.
No, they don't. They really don't. It's like doctor, lawyer, revolutionary. It's not. It's not necessarily where most of us imagine ourselves going in life, but the reality is that ordinary people put in extraordinary circumstances find themselves rising to the occasion. And I think that that's what Srdja's interview and just the bit that I know about his life and what he's dedicated himself to in the world reflects, is that ordinary people will be the response. They will respond to when they see injustice rise up. I mean, it's fascinating and beautiful and really encouraging for me to hear in his sharing that when he was, just living his best late teen, early 20 life in the 90s, playing in his rock band, that when he was seeing war break out around him and seeing ethnic cleansing and experiencing inflation and the crushing blow that leads to in people's communities, that he and folks like him are just we want to do something about this, especially because they didn't think that being an activist was for them. I mean, specifically, he had said something along the lines. Yeah, he had said something along the lines that activism was a thing for older people, which is very interesting to me because I think most folks get activated very young. Like it is
Yeah.
in your teens and your early 20s that like you do this work. But it's just fascinating that like it just never occurred to him that this could be his life, but it has
Right.
become that.
Right. Well, I love that he thought it was boring. He thought activism was boring
Mm-hmm.
at first,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why he didn't want to. And it was actually another rock band that inspired him to get involved in that way. I think like that story is super
Mm-hmm.
encouraging for me. And I think that what we do so often with people like Sergio is we say,
Mm-hmm.
we put them in this like great man category where, you
Mm-hmm.
know, only they could have done what they did. And I love that, you know, his story brings it down to the ground and says like, no, like we were just a bunch of college kids. We started pulling pranks in order as acts
Mm-hmm.
of resistance against the dictatorship. And it turned into
Mm-hmm.
a movement of 70,000
Mm-hmm.
Serbians. And they did get some
And started
training.
at
Like,
11. But it started at
yes,
11 people.
yes, exactly. Exactly. 11 people.
11 to 70,000.
And they made it fun. Like that was the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like fun and humor was such a huge part of what they were doing. I don't know. That's just really, really encouraging to me, especially considering like the things that we're looking at in America. And that was also, I mean, this is why I started doing this podcast, is because I really wanted for ordinary people to hear about these kinds of stories so that they could know that you don't have to be you don't have to be a political scientist. You don't have to have advanced degrees in sociology. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
have 20 years of organizing experience. You know, we can respond to the big problems in our society and we can win.
Absolutely. And I think that like it's important for us to remember that like, yeah, you can be anyone, including an artist. That's one of the things that
Yes.
really, really encouraged me in hearing Search to Speak. It's because this revolution, like this toppling, happened because musicians were in conversation with one another. And then out of
Mm,
conversation, they created art. And that art is what helped motivate people to continue to seek change. Like their
yeah.
songs became anthems.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for us to remember, like as we work towards social transformation, like in whatever context that we're in, that it takes all different folks, including our creatives. It takes people like, you know,
Yes.
dedicating their creative energies in order for us to like to see the change that we want in the world.
Yeah.
And so like one of the
Absolutely
questions
agree.
that I thought of in reflecting on this was about like art stirring our consciousness, and specifically like wondering
Mm,
what forms of art have stirred our
yeah.
consciousnesses. Yeah, what forms of art has stirred your consciousness? Like what about like these works moved you to want to work for change?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that like, you know, that art making definitely comes alongside things like education. um
Yes.
and that was a point that Sergio had shared, because like this was the 90s and everything wasn't Googleable. And
Hmm.
that's actually like a really interesting thing to think about right now, in light of some of the current social commentary that's taken
Yeah.
place, particularly within the last, well, at the time of recording, the last like 12 to 14 hours or so. So
Hmm.
yesterday, the US president got impeached. It's the
Yeah.
third time in history that we see this. And so like, you know, it's just interesting seeing what people do and do not know because of our educational system,
Yeah.
um, and their engagement in it. And it's like it's fascinating, like to sit and watch. Unfortunately, some people like do the work of shaming people for not knowing certain things while
Hmm.
forgetting the fact that like our education isn't all it's not equitable. And
Right.
even though you may have had a robust physics class in the ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, does not mean that everyone was afforded those same opportunities. And so
Right.
I think, you know, the point that Sergio makes, that education is important, like, yes, education is absolutely important in getting a hold of things, in whatever way that you can, but also like making space and movement to remember that not everyone is afforded the same types of education as you,
Yeah.
and hasn't and you haven't necessarily had to overcome the same obstacles to being educated as other folks have. I think that's just an
Yeah.
important thing to hold in mind.
Yeah. What other questions do you have?
I think that there's something to be said about making mistakes.
Yeah.
Actually, Sergio said something about making mistakes and how that was as much of a teacher as like reading books and getting, a hold of, things related to, strategy and tactics and training. Like just getting it wrong sometimes help them get it right.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Failure is such like an interesting thing to think about because I don't think we live in a culture that makes room for people to fail on levels. I mean that on
Yeah.
levels.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
failure is seen as, I mean, I don't know if we have another word for failure than failure. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think of failure as an opportunity. And like I was really, really grateful for Sergio to have brought that up because in them messing up, in them not doing things successfully, they were able to develop different tactics, different methodologies. Just got to know themselves and their people better.
Yeah.
And they were able to do better because they decided to like not just like sit in a place where they were defeated.
Yeah. I hear you saying that they didn't give up, you know.
Hmm.
They didn't say,
Yeah,
well, we tried this
this
thing
was
and
real.
it didn't work and throw up their hands and walk away.
Nope. And they were in it for a long time, y'all. Like this took 9
10 years.
years.
Oh, you're
Them,
at 9 years.
yeah, 10 years, 9, 10 years. It took almost a decade for
We can make up our minds. We're like, yeah, 9 years, 10 years, 9 or 10 years, almost a decade,
almost
somewhere
a
around there.
decade. It took a while. It took a while.
Well, I think the thing that just is on my mind a lot, like when I say a lot, I mean literally every single day, is we need millions of people. we need millions of organized people to be ready for nonviolent resistance. I don't know how that's going to happen right now. I don't know how to get from point A to point B on that right now. I mean, I have some ideas.
Well, you have some ideas as the Srdja. And then one of the points that he makes in the interview was around vision. And I think that's a thing that like we need to pay attention to. It's like what visions are being
Absolutely.
casted. And
Absolutely.
like, thinking about the movements that like, we want to like align ourselves with, like, what is their vision? Like,
Yeah.
we're supporting these things, but can we outline like what their goals are, what their picture of what the world that needs to come should look like? Do we know it? And if we know it, like how are we communicating that to other people?
And how they plan to pursue that. Because there are
Mhm.
some movements that have incredible vision, you know.
Mhm.
But the means to get there, doesn't fit their aspirations. And
Mhm.
also, where does the vision come from? Right? Like, so something I
Mhm.
think about a lot is how like we can't come up with vision for tomorrow by someone thinking that they're just going to be like Moses and go up to the top of the mountain and come back down and give it
Mhm.
to the people. We need
Mhm.
that. We need a vision that captures the imagination of the American people, or whatever country you're in. We're talking about the U.S. right now, but
Mhm.
and the way that you get that is by listening to them.
Mhm. Go figure. Like listening is a part of social change. Just who would have thought? Yeah, no, seriously. Like
Listening.
listening, listening to people on, who are actors in different ways. Like, yes, listening to movements, listening to people on the ground, people who are living different realities. Like, I don't know what people think that social transformation requires, but listening is a key part of it.
Yes, for sure.
Like, just it's so key. And so if you've not yet adopted a posture of listening, like it's time. It's well past time, really.
Well, I think that raises a good question. Like when you say if you, like who are we talking to, right? And this is partly why I asked Serja the question, like, what about folks who don't want to be like leaders and organizers in this? Like people who are just saying, like, I
Mhm.
want to be a part of this, but I mean, I don't want to like become, the person that you're interviewing on this podcast about it. And I love his advice
Mhm.
of saying, like, if you don't want to be a leader, be a follower.
Mhm. Yeah, everybody plays a role. Like not everybody leads. I mean, and the reality is that like leading, following, it takes all different types of like shapes and forms. And I think this is one of the things that Andre
Yes.
and I are hoping to accomplish here is like helping people like understand like, where your place is and like where your role is. I mean, we're trying to encourage other people to think about this as we ourselves like do this work to consider
Yes.
like how do we fit into the picture? Like, for me, leading looks like asking questions. Like it's what I'm good at. I'm good at forming questions. I'm good at thinking about things and encouraging people to do the same. And so whether it be like through this podcast or through like my consulting or facilitation work and even in my writing, like
Yeah.
I ask questions. That's what I contribute to this
Yes.
work. I like want people to think about things.
Yes.
And so I ask and
Also,
yeah.
also you are not just a wonderful facilitator, but you are sensitive to other people in a way that I have not really encountered in my life. Like the way that you're able to hold space for other people it's a gift. And I think about the role of that in building a mass movement a lot now because of my friendship with you. Even just the way that you handle the people that you have not met face to face on this show, right? Like always thinking about, well, they may not understand that, so we need to explain that, or we need to make sure that we warn them that this is coming. I just think about how valuable that is as groups of people decide to come together to change the world.
Well, that's super meaningful. Thank you. I mean, it's because I get the fact that like movements and change don't happen without people. It
Yes.
just and so if you're not thinking about people's needs and they're wants, but really they're like needs, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that we
Mhm.
want that's kind of superfluous and it just neither here nor there. And like you can't meet every accommodation, but there are some core things that you can do to open up spaces for belonging. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all I want to do with my life, right? Like in whatever work that I do and not even just like with my work, just like really with the totality of my life, is I want to like cultivate spaces where people feel like they can belong. So it's a thing that like I do in my home. It's a thing that I do in my professional life. It's a thing that I do in my ministry when I like to claim ministry. Like
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
cultivating spaces for belonging, like where people feel like they can be a part of and like and satisfy that need to be connected to people for the sake of whatever it is. Like that's what I
Mhm.
want to do with my life. And
Yeah.
so, like, when it comes to social change, like, I think that that's really important is like helping people figure out, like, you too have a role, you too have a place here. Because I think sometimes more often than not, people are excluded and they are pushed out and they are told that they don't fit
Yeah.
and that they don't have the ability to like lend whatever it is that they're bringing. And I think that that's trash. Like, I don't really have another word that I wanna draw off other than it's garbage. Like, it's a garbage idea, and it needs to be thrown away. Like,
Yeah.
you do have value, you do have worth, and even if you think that what you have isn't much, it's still worth bringing to the table. Because the cool thing about tables is when everything is set up on them, no one knows who brought what. They just know that, like, we all get to eat now. There's so many things that we can do, and it all is a part of, like, amassing and building our people power.
Thanks for listening to the Hope and Hard Pills podcast. As always, we love putting the show together for you. And this episode is really special because it's the beginning of a new era, thanks to our new friend Janet and her book. Janet Ellsbach has a cookbook called Extra Helping: Recipes for Caring, Connecting, and Building Community. It's a guide to the connections that are possible when we feed others in times of hardship and celebration. Everybody eats, so show up and cook. Available wherever books are sold. And Janet, one of our listeners, so generously has donated some sound equipment for us, which you might notice the difference in Alicia's recording quality because of
I sound
the
so much better, y'all.
because of our work being underwritten by Janet's work. And also, you might notice that we're able to post a bit more about the podcast online. We're posting video clips again and all that kind of thing because of the generous support that Janet's given us. If you want to know how to support us, as always, our producer is going to tell you how in the credits of the show. Okay, thanks for listening. Until next time.
We're looking to connect with you soon. Take care.
We're not living in your fantasy. Your Daffy Duck and your Bugs Bunny. Wearing clothes that we cannot.
Thank you for listening today. If you like what you heard and you haven't already, please subscribe on your favorite podcatcher. Leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts also helps us get into more ears and minds. This podcast is made possible by our fantastic patrons. Thank you for being a part of our work at Hope and Hard Pills. As usual, you'll get the uncut extended version of this episode on Patreon. If you want to join in on the work on our Patreon community, just look us up at patreon.com/Andre Henry. To go deeper, get subscribed to our email newsletter. Head over to andrerhenry.com and click Join the Movement, where you'll get practical insight on anti-racism and social change every week. And you'll never miss a new article, song, or podcast episode. You can also follow Andre Henry on Facebook and Instagram at @TheAndreHenry. Connect with Alicia on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alicia T. Crosby and her website, aliciatcrosby.com. That's all for this episode of the Hope and Hard Pills podcast. See you next time. Peace.